Welcome, Friday afternoon it is, and Golden Black Live, and Brian Neubert and Tom Dienhart join me. A busy night for Purdue basketball. We'll hit that topic, talk a little bit of football as well. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, on the hill but on the level, the Purdue tradition since 1929. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day. Stay at HGI tonight. State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. And, of course, all the folks at WLFI for helping us out as well, Gordon Jackson and company. We have segment 2 today will be Mike DeCourcy from the Sporting News, Big Ten Network, Fox. He was on last night. He'll have a lot to talk about, the Purdue-Indiana game, et cetera. And then, of course, segment 3, David Bodaya will join us. And David, really interesting. Obviously, David needs no introduction to Purdue folks, but talking about the Weight of Gold, which is his documentary he was a part of, a HBO documentary, mental illness and some of the stresses that go on with that. David will be very interesting, I think, on that front as well. So, Brian, we'll start with you because last night Purdue really put on a excellent display in a 12-point win at Indiana. It's hard to say it's old hat, but it is what is it? The Boilermakers 8 in a row now against the Hoosiers, and they didn't make it look completely easy, but they did. They were able to kind of coast home and to a double-digit victory at Assembly Hall.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was easy because they had to respond to a lot of things Indiana did in the second half. Indiana was within one possession, I think, 9 times, and Purdue answered it. Every time, obviously, never relinquished the lead. I thought Purdue played one of its most complete games of the season, if not its most complete game of the season. I thought they executed at their highest level offensively they have all season against what's a pretty respectable defensive team. I thought they had some flaws defensively, but there was a stretch there in the second half where Indiana went like 5.5 minutes to 6 minutes without a field goal. I think when Purdue needed stops, it got stops. When Purdue needed rebounds, it got rebounds. And when Purdue needed to make a play to respond to Indiana, they made a play to respond to Indiana. Travion Williams is playing at a really high level right now. Eric Hunter's back on track. It looks like the freshmen all established themselves as gamers. I think 4 of those 5 guys were all really, really important factors in that win, and just a really good all-around performance by Purdue.
Yeah, Brian, you mentioned Travion Williams. Sort of surveying some of the coverage last night from the IU side, they were lamenting how the IU backcourt was outplayed by the Purdue backcourt. Just address that a little bit. Talked about Ivy and Hunter a little bit, especially Ivy coming off the bench with 13 points. That was big.
Yeah, well, when you can shoot, you're really hard to guard. When you can't shoot, you're a lot easier to guard. Yeah. Indiana has a really, really good player in Trayce Jackson-Davis, but they don't have enough weapons around him from the perimeter to really, really leverage, the matchups. And Purdue does. And Purdue's not going to shoot 11 to 17 from three-point range every night. They had been shooting pretty poorly by their past standards in Big Ten play prior to last night. But, Purdue is capable, and they showed it last night. Indiana isn't, a particularly good shooting team. And that's really something that has stuck out about this rivalry lately. I thought it really mattered last season, and I think it really matters this season. And, I thought Purdue did a pretty good job defensively against Indiana's guards, but also I think Indiana's guards are just really limited offensively. And for that reason, you just don't have a lot of offensive balance. And, Trayce Jackson-Davis can go get 25 for you. I thought he played pretty well. When Purdue had a track record last year, doing a pretty good job on him. Trayce Jackson-Davis can go get you 25 points, but you still can't win because you just can't get enough around him. If Indiana had a guy or two you really had to worry about from the three-point arc, your defensive game plan would have been entirely different. Your floor spacing might have been different, and Indiana would have had a much better chance probably. But that's the difference offensively between these two teams is one has guys who can make shots, and one doesn't have quite as many.
Yeah, you look at that in a number of factors. Purdue's switch got turned on in the second half against Michigan State. There's still there's treachery everywhere you turn in the Big Ten. Maybe too early to say Purdue's turned the corner and this is an NCAA tournament team, but it's starting really to look like it. And what do you think are the big things it's got to continue to do? I mean, you're not going to shoot 11 to 17 every night, but this team seems to have some of the right ingredients to be able to compete against just about anybody.
Yeah, the Michigan State game and Indiana games were 2 entirely different games.
Yeah.
Michigan State was a game where you scored 16 points in the first half. You did enough over 38 and a half minutes to get yourself beat. And then you just smashed and grabbed at the end and stole it, literally stole it. What you wanted to see from that was you wanted to see Purdue come out at Indiana with a certain, I guess, focus about them and attention to detail that suggests that they realize that even though they beat Michigan State, that doesn't mean they, quote, beat Michigan State. They won at Michigan State, but they didn't necessarily beat them. And I thought you saw that. I thought they executed really well offensively. I thought they were, pretty good from a defensive perspective. I thought their effort was really good. And if Purdue just does that, if they just pay attention to little details, if they screen and they make good passes and they, pay attention to their responsibilities on defense, they're getting better and better right before your eyes, I think. And that's simply the most important thing. It's just, it sounds so cliched to say that, but when you just do little details right, and this team hasn't all season long, and I can give you 100 examples. I'm not just parroting what the coaches say here. Parroting, not parakeeting. Parroting.
Parroting.
I've got my birds mixed up. They can be pretty good, and I do think they're getting better before your eyes with a lot more ceiling left to maximize here. They are, I don't want to say definitively they're playing like an NCAA tournament team right now. I think they're playing like an NCAA tournament team. I'm not saying that they're necessarily in right now, but when you look at the fact you're 4-3 in the treacherous Big Ten, with most of your most difficult road games behind you, a lot of home games on the back end of this, I think you've put yourself in a really good spot here.
Yeah, 3 of the next 4 games, guys, in Mackey Arena. Of course, Sunday, Penn State, then the big bad Wolverines, the unbeaten Wolverines. Then you go to Ohio State, then the Golden Gophers on January 30th. So like you said, Brian, plenty of opportunity for some home cooking, even without fans, just to be back in your comfort zone, in your friendly confines, so to speak. Has to help Purdue guys, and guys, to think where this team was at when the season began with some tough losses to Clemson, that loss at Miami, some of the struggles against others early on, and now talk about this being maybe an NCAA tournament team. It's been quite an evolution the last few weeks by this basketball team.
I think a couple of things are going on there. One, I think Travion Williams is getting better and better. And I think there's some factors to that might not necessarily meet the eye. I think personally, it's my theory that this bizarro world summer was harder on big people whose conditioning really matters most. And whether they got the virus or not, I think that, it was easy for guys to, for their conditioning to fall off a little bit. And I think that's obviously really important to Travion Williams. I also think he's just kind of growing up. He's kind of maturing a little bit. He's starting to talk like a coach. He was the one who, instead of beating his chest over the win last night and then going back home, to play Penn State, he was the one basically talking like Matt Painter when he says, we have to understand that going home doesn't guarantee us anything. We still have to keep playing well, and we still have to keep up this effort level. I think too that, Purdue's freshmen are just, getting better and better. And I think they're all gamers. I think I said that at the top of this thing, that all of those guys have been ready for their moments. They were ready for their moments yesterday. 4 of those 5 freshmen really played a heavy role in, that win last night. And obviously the one who I'm not mentioning is Zach Edey, who's been, a godsend for Purdue all season long. His productivity has dipped in Big Ten play, but that was always going to happen. Jaden Ivey came up big last night. Jaden Ivey came up big at Michigan State. Ethan Morton, who was, I wouldn't even classify him as a, quote, shooter at this point in his career. He makes, there's always a rando in, these Purdue IU games when Purdue wins. And, it was Tyrone Johnson in Bloomington years ago, Sterling Carter, Bryson Scott, whoever it might be. There's always some random dude who just does something out of the ordinary against Indiana. Aaron Wheeler in Bloomington last year. Ethan Morton makes that 3, gigantic shot for Purdue. They had a really, really flawed offensive lineup out there on the floor at that point in time. Somebody needed to make a shot who you're not necessarily counting on to make a shot. He makes a shot. Just a huge play. Brandon Newman was outstanding yesterday. Mason Gillis was outstanding yesterday. A really promising future in store for Purdue here, but a pretty decent present too with these guys.
Yeah, going to be an interesting storyline to watch. All right, we're going to switch. We've got a couple minutes left in the segment. Tom, I'll start with you with Mark Hagan, the hiring of the defensive line, and we're still waiting for the defensive coordinator. But I think obviously an important hire, and a guy that knows Purdue football, knows the state of Indiana recruiting, and is just a good football guy in Mark. And I know both you and Brian have relationships with Mark going way back. But let me give us your first impression about his return to West Lafayette.
Outstanding. I mean, that's sort of sums it up in one word, I think. A real home run hire, Alan. You talked about some of the reasons why this was a hand meets glove type of a situation for Purdue and Hagan. The familiarity with the school, with the state of Indiana for Mark is well documented from Carmel, Indiana. Was a star football player at IU, recruited the state for years and years, even when he left the state to work in Texas, he'd come back into Hoosier State and recruit players. So he knows the terrain, knows the coaches, knows the high school. He will be a heck of an asset from a recruiting standpoint, in-state in particular. And as a coach, guys, I tell you what, everybody I talk to that's his peer always has great things to say about Mark. And they usually come unsolicited. And again, he's a well-respected coach who does a great job. And I tell you what, fellas, anybody who's familiar with this roster knows Purdue's defensive line is going to need some help, especially if they lose both those tackles, Neal and Watts. So Mark's arrival could be timed tremendously to help that D-line develop into a force, hopefully, for years to come.
Brian, you obviously knew him well and have known him over the years and covered football very close when his time at Purdue from 2000 to 2010. Your impressions of Mark and what he'll bring to the table?
Just a guy who really does a nice job. And this isn't easy to do, between being really demanding and really businesslike with his players, but still is beloved by his players. It's a really hard balance to strike for coaches. He's a good recruiter. He's as meticulous a recruiter as I think perhaps Purdue's ever had. Absolute bulldog in recruiting, so to speak. At least the Mark Hagan I know from years ago. I doubt he's changed.
Yeah.
Just a really good, solid guy, and just a good person, a good coach, a guy who's really demanding of his players, a guy who brings a lot of intensity, to the field, and just somebody who's really going to help Purdue. This was just a really good hire, and something that just really worked out well for both sides, because I know he obviously enjoyed his time at Purdue, wanted to get back to Indiana probably, and just a really good move that makes a lot of sense for both sides.
Timing is everything, and certainly for Mark, that is a big part of it. And his former players, as we understand it, had a role in this too. At least some amount of lobbying went on. Not that he necessarily needed it with his credentials of being at Indiana, Texas A&M, and Texas, but this is a guy that his players had something to say about his return. So it'll be interesting to watch that, and we'll stay tuned. Obviously, we'll hopefully know him, the defensive coordinator, before long. But guys, we'll take a short break and come back. Brian will join me with Mike DeCourcy for segment 2 of Gold and Black Live, and we will look forward to in segment 3. David Bodiah will join me for a segment as well. So stay tuned. We'll see you in a couple of minutes on Gold and Black Live.